Hello, everyone. I'm Dianna Sinovic and a member of the Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group. Welcome to the Easton Book Festival. In this recording, I'll be talking with three authors about genre fiction. But before we start, I'm going to ask each author to briefly introduce themselves. Phil, let's start with you.
I'm Phil Junta. I too am a member of the Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group, and I write in what's considered speculative fiction genres: science fiction, fantasy, paranormal, and recently detective and mystery. My three novels that I have out in one series, paranormal mystery series, include Testing the Prisoner, By Your Side, and Like Mother, Like Daughters.
Thanks, Phil. Rachel, let's go with you next.
Oh, my name is Rachel Thompson, and what I primarily do now is in the vein of science fiction, fantasy, and also social satire. I kind of model my writing, some of my writing, after Kurt Vonnegut, which kind of defies genre a little bit. But I also do historical fiction, and I have branched out in many areas. But what I don't do is mystery, as Phil and Michael do. So I'm eager to learn more about that.
Thanks, Rachel. And Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Daigle. I live in Phillipsburg. I'm also a member of the Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group. I write, at the moment, I'm writing primarily in mystery thrillers. I have a 5-book series called The Frank Nagler Mysteries, set in a town called Ironton, New Jersey. I also have, in various stages of computer files, non-mystery stuff that I poke at every now and then. But mostly I'm working on the Nagler series. The latest book was out in September. It was called Dragony Rising.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Okay, let's launch into our questions. I'll try to be kind. Let's start with you, Michael. How did you decide on mystery thriller?
I came to mystery writing this series by way of John Updike. Read his Rabbit books and was drawn by the close nature of Harry Angstrom's life with the town he grew up in. And in the 4 books, Harry and the town change through a long, decades-long process. And I was thinking about how you could write a character like that, and it turned out to be through another process. It turned out to be Frank Nagler, who is a native of Ironton, New Jersey, and has the same kind of connection to his town that John Updike created with the Rabbit books.
I'll just ask a follow-up question. I don't usually think of Updike as a mystery writer, so I guess
I didn't use him as a mystery writer. I used him as the concept.
Okay.
And from there, when I got into the mystery part of this, after I got out of college, I literally sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to write a mystery series. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to write, but let me just start writing and we'll see what happens. 50 years later, I have 5 books and a 6th in the works. But it started, the nature of that relationship is at the heart of the Nagler books, as it was with the Rabbit books.
Okay, great. Phil, how did you hit on speculative fiction?
Growing up surrounded by science fiction fans at the age of 6, Star Wars hit the theaters. I started watching Star Trek, started reading science fiction in middle school. Became captivated with the idea of just exploring space, exploring other worlds. But at the same time, I love ghost stories. Complete turnaround from science fiction. Whereas you think of science fiction, and when you really think about hard science fiction, you think of the research and the science that goes into the basis of your story. Whereas paranormal is completely the opposite. You don't really need to have a basis in physics or chemistry to write a good ghost story. Both of those genres really capture my attention, because even if you don't believe in ghosts, hey, everyone loves a good ghost story. They're just a lot of fun to write. And fantasy, I dabble in fantasy. I have a few short stories in that genre, 2 or 3 short stories. I'm trying to expand in that direction a little bit more and learn a bit more about that genre. And most recently, over the past few years, I've seen a lot of open calls for mystery short stories, so I'm doing it that way as well. And just trying to ever expand my writing repertoire, if you will.
Hmm.
That's great. And Rachel, you've got a lot in your.
Oh, yeah, I'm loaded. You know, I'm like a Gatling gun. I have a lot of barrels. Essentially, you know, being an early reader, I gravitated to science fiction, but at the same time, I was reading a lot of nonfiction. I was reading a lot of fantasy stuff, Greek Greek theology and ancient religions fascinated me. So I had two fascinations going on. And then I discovered Kurt Vonnegut. And right after I discovered Kurt Vonnegut, I read Tolkien. So, you know, that's it. That kind of set the tone. And so fast forward 50 years, my first book that I actually wrote, beginning to end, the third one I published, was actually a fantasy, which I never thought of myself as a fantasy writer. Essentially, what happened there was we had a brainstorming session in a class I was taking, and the idea lit on fire. But I knew I didn't know how to write very well, so I waited a long time. I spent a long time working on that book. When I felt confident, I finally published it after publishing two other books before that. So essentially, my first book is a fantasy book, and I would have expected myself to be writing something else, like classic science fiction, kind of stuff I grew up on. But I also love social satire. I love comedy. I love Douglas Adams and Kurt Vonnegut. Anything that makes me laugh. I love ideas that are silly and weird. So what I like to do, as some of my favorite authors have done in the past, is take these weird things and mash them together and come up with something else. So I'm inspired by the process. So I guess I write idea stories, whether it's in whether it happened 5,000 years ago or whether it's going to happen 5,000 years from now. It's always about the ideas for me, you know, what they represent. So, you know, I write the setting to suit the idea, so to speak. And I'll stop here because I can go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, if you were surprised that you wrote a fantasy novel when you have cited Tolkien, I don't think that's too much of a surprise, right?
I didn't expect myself to go there first because, and you know, quite frankly, I read the whole Tolkien series at least 10 times. I'm going to read it again. I'm not done. But I don't consider myself a fantasy reader or a fantasy author per se. It's just one of the feathers in the cap, so to speak. So.
Okay. My next question, I will start with Rachel. You've written in several genres, and you mentioned that you don't write mystery or thriller. Why not? And are there other genres you want to try that you haven't?
Well, I haven't gone there yet because, you know, of the learning curve. I haven't read a lot of it. And as every writer will say, a writer needs to read a lot. I feel like I want to go there at some point. I don't know enough about it, and I don't want to stumble through it and not do it at least reasonably well. So I need to read more about it. I need to understand more about it before I'll tackle it. I'm not that I'm not interested, because everything has elements of everything else in it at some point. So even some of my science fiction is sort of action adventure-ish. There's always a little bit of mystery involved. There's always a story question. I want to develop that further. So I do want to become, at some point, experiment or try some mystery writing or detective stories, which I have no experience with yet. So.
Great. Michael, is there a genre that other genres you've dabbled in?
I dabble in writing poetry because I like the sound that I can create with writing poems. When I was a kid, the second book I wrote after I got out of college was a coming of age novel. And I put it aside because I really didn't think it was very good. And I read it last year and it wasn't that bad. and it's almost salvageable, although I'm going to have to completely rewrite it to make it work. Um, and I only, I mean, I became a mystery writer by accident because I liked the character, I liked the setting, and I thought there was a lot to work with there. So I mostly I have like three partially complete novels on my computer, and when I have a slow day, I go back and poke at them. Um, it's a learning process in both. It isn't so much that there's a certain structure to writing mystery, and you have to be careful that you don't get into a rigid formula, because then you write the same story all the time. But as I'm learning, and the reason I think I keep writing in the Nagler series is I'm finally learning how to do it. So it's a work in progress. But I also, as I go back and look at the other non-mystery books that I'm working on, I see things in technique that I can borrow from mystery writing to make them make their plot work better, make their characters work better. It's all one big experiment uh, for the longest time, and then and then your deadline comes, and then you focus in and finish off the book. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that to Rachel's point, there's a mystery in every,
Yeah.
not a formal mystery, but there were always
Yeah,
questions.
there's elements of things that you use in mystery, very obviously, that you use in um, non-mystery stories. You have to have foreshadowing. You have to leave questions for the reader about character that you can use later to reveal the meaning of the story and all of those kinds of things. In mysteries, you do it pretty directly because you're trying to get everybody to turn the page as fast as you can get them to turn the page. In a pastoral type novel, you don't have to do it so quickly, but you use the technique.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Phil, what about you? Have you dabbled in other genres or?
Well, yeah, over the past few years, experimenting with, again, detective and mystery,
Mhm.
fantasy, and even just literary stories. I published a story about a rock star trying to recover her life after drug addiction and alcoholism, which was the first story in the Rites of Passage Glivwig anthology.
Oh,
There's
great.
nothing speculative about it. There are no monsters, no aliens, no fantastical creatures. It's simply a very human story from the heart. Um, Similarly, I published last year a story about a guy who is walking along a beach on his way to a date, and he wonders to himself, what about the people from my past who could see me now living in a beach house? And what he thinks of as he's walking along are all the abusive parents, failed marriages, all the people that come to mind when he thinks, what would they say if they could see me now? And there's nothing speculative about it. It's a very human from the heart story, where by the end of the story, he almost thinks he's not even worth this woman's time that he's going to meet. And then finally, in the end, his very first wife, who passed from cancer, comes to his mind and tells him what a great human being he was for supporting her through her trial and tribulations of her disease. And he realizes, no, I am worthy. Nothing speculative about it at all, but it was a wonderful story to write because very human and very from the heart. And I enjoyed that, breaking away from speculative fiction and breaking away from creatures and aliens and whatnot. So I enjoy dabbling in that type of story as well.
Yeah, you read part of that story to the writers group, and that was a terrific story.
Oh, thank you.
Well drawn into it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I'll toss this out for anyone to answer. Is there any genre you would not want to try? I mean, regardless, if learning about it was no option, is there any that just don't do anything for you, and you wouldn't go that route?
Oh, romance. I just don't like romance novels. And the funny thing is about it is in some of my books, I kind of lost track how many I'm up to now. Let me see, 5 novels, 1 anthology. I have another anthology coming out and another novel coming out. Anyway, by the way, why I love short fiction like Phil does is because you can explore these ideas left and right. And now I lost my train of thought.
Romance. Why you hate it? Romance.
I do incorporate romance in some of my stories. It's unavoidable to do it well, to really understand it, I'm not there. But in modern fiction today, you have to have a little piece of everything. Readers expect more. So if there's some romantic tension as a complicating factor, that's good for any story, even if it's not a romance. So, as much as I don't like to read them, I incorporate some of the concepts that are used in romance because it helps what I'm doing. But I don't like reading it. I don't have the patience for it.
I tend not to think about writing in fantasy, and mostly because I'm intimidated by my friends who do it remarkably well. I have a friend of mine who was in college, and a friend I met through the Phillipsburg Library Group, both who have different takes on fantasy writing. And I get done reading their book and go, wow, that is, they're amazing stories, characterizations, but just the way they approach the whole genre is intimidating. And I'm going, well, I'm not going to go anywhere near that. And it's not that you become a writing coward. It's just that I recognize that I can't do it that well. Let me work in the areas that I know, and learn more about, rather than jumping off the cliff and trying to write like them, knowing that I can't, because they have a particular way of presenting the stories that is just amazing. And you get done reading them, and it's like, holy smokes, So
Yeah, it's extremely complex. My first fantasy novel, which worked very well, it took me a year to plot it. Every detail, backstories, deep psychology, deep history. It took a whole year just to get ready to write it.
yeah,
It's an intense process to write a full-length fantasy novel.
It's the world building that really takes a lot of your
Yeah.
time.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and I'm glad I did it. And I'll stick to science fiction. It's easier.
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what the old adage in the writing world is, write what you know. So if it's something you know how to do well, and that's also where your fan base is, right, too. So people
Well,
are expecting.
For me, I studied Joseph Campbell intently. I read his books. I studied the whole psychology of it. Social psychology and anthropology are hobbies of mine, interests of mine. And so I just employed everything I learned about psychology, and became an expert at the hero's journey, actually, in order to write this novel. So you don't employ a lot of that stuff in other kind of writing. But to do this novel, it was a huge learning curve. And
Mhm.
to write mystery for me would be the same kind of huge learning curve, So it is scary.
Yeah.
Let me start with Phil this time. Pick one of your genres and tell us is there anything particularly challenging? What challenges do you have to overcome? You mentioned science fiction, the scientific research. Would that be something you would?
That would
Character.
qualify as something that's
Yeah.
challenging, certainly. In some of my science fiction stories, I try to incorporate some amount of science. For example, I recently submitted a story for an open call that required tales that happened underground. And as it happens, I had written a story involving seismology, right, the study of earthquakes, and lava tubes, and explorers who are underground exploring lava tubes, and how they use P waves and S waves and seismology to get a topographical map of an area, et cetera. So that was included in the story. And also, as part of the same story, animal behavior. There are some creatures who live under the ground, and they evolved in such a way that they have adapted to their environment without certain senses that are not necessary underground, such as sight. And so that kind of science and research went into the story. So yeah, it is challenging to present the material well. You want to present fiction to be entertaining, but at the same time have that basis in science. Absolutely.
And so to overcome that, you just do spend a lot of time in research. Do you have some go-to people in the fields that you ask questions of, or you're just Googling?
In some cases it was Googling. In some cases I might find someone who knows biology or anatomy, someone I know who may be a physician or a research scientist. I have a friend who's a research scientist, for example, for Pfizer, who lives in London. He used to live here in America, but he moved to England. And I might run some questions by him. I have another friend who worked for Johns Hopkins. I might throw some questions her way as well. So yeah, once in a while, if I can find someone who is knowledgeable in that area, I'll definitely ping them for some questions. Sure.
Okay. So Michael, are you, in your mysteries, are you writing crime fiction? Like, do you have to do police research, or what's your challenge?
The challenge is I was a newspaper reporter for 40 years. A lot of the research I did was becoming an instant expert on nearly everything that we had to write about in 12 hours, so the reader the next day could understand it. In creating the world of Ironton, I bring in all of that stuff. What I'm trying to do with these stories, not just write cop and robber stories, but there's layers of sociology and urban development and poverty discussions and all of those things, trying to make those things relevant to the larger story. So I'm always going, as the series progresses, I'm always looking through the 19 news websites I read every day, looking for things that that sociologists and urban developers are working on as projects, to see if I can steal the idea and to translate that into something that has a relevancy to Ironton. So you're always have a basis of knowledge and a basis of finding the knowledge, and you just build on it all the time. I mean, if I'm writing a scene and I want to do something, I'll stop and I'll go online, start Googling stuff to see what has been written about it. I mean, for example, the town is based on towns in New Jersey that were involved in the iron manufacturing business for 30 years. So one of the things they did over the last couple of years is download 2 700-page geology reports from the state of New Jersey about the iron business. And surprisingly, I know a lot about it. It's very scary, And in fact, I know so much about it, I do a library presentation on it. But there's the real. This is done by real geologists who went out into the field and stuck shovels in the ground and developed the entire history of the industry over 300 years and put it down. And it's fascinating stuff. And so you try to take my fascination in that and ripple that through the stories.
Yeah, I'm thinking writers from, say, 50 years ago who did not have the internet had to do a lot more.
The scary thing is, in the newspaper business, when you're trying to do the same thing. 20 years ago, I did a piece on the iron business. I spent 8 weeks in a library because the internet didn't exist. So I was going from library to library, pulling out these 1873 mining reports that were in the library. Now I can find them all online. So yeah, huge, speeds up your process very much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just in my own writing, if I'm thinking, so now what was this like? And then I could just Google, what was the year, or where is this town, or what's the description of this animal?
Yeah,
it's wonderful to have that.
Yeah, it saves us all lifetimes of research. But the research, if you know what you're looking for, it has great value because you can get through the nonsense, you get through the fluff, and get to the real topics. Because there are people who write them, and colleges put all this stuff up online all the time now. So it's and even the big difference, honestly, in 30 years in New Jersey was how much information from the government is now posted online. I used to do a lot of environmental writing, and you'd have to spend weeks waiting for them to send you a report. Now I can get a water quality report in 30 seconds. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Mm.
And Rachel, for you, what challenges do you need to overcome?
The challenge is really trying to stuff it all in. Plus, I'm forever learning. I don't know. I'm kind of manic. I'm like an idea generator. I can write a short story almost every day. So it's a challenge not to. I recently started putting together a new anthology after publishing my last novel in June. And I've been collecting some stuff. I had some old stuff laying around. I thought, I'll start working on it. I thought, maybe I got 10,000 words there. Well, I've been working on it. Now I'm up to 87,000 words. I just copyrighted it. And now I'm going to start polishing it. And it's going to get published in a couple of months. Because I just can't, the ideas just come out of everywhere for me. So my challenge is to focus and choose a trajectory and stick on it and stay on the project. And I know I got to grind through this manuscript line by line. It's a long, slow process, but I want to write another short story instead. So I can't write another short story. I got to work on what I have to work on. That's the big challenge. Focus, stay
Okay.
on the track.
So not so much the genre challenge, but you're working how you operate, how you work.
How I operate. Yeah. It's it's a lonely thing. And actually the research part of it that we were just speaking of is one of my favorite things because I don't have to grind away at what I'm doing. And like Michael, I worked in journalism, not as long and not as experienced as him. But one of the things I learned in journalism is that people love to talk about what they do. And it's a shortcut. You don't have to necessarily sit there forever in Google, and you can, like I like to call up colleges. I call up a department in anthropology, say, hey, you got anybody that knows anything about Middle Eastern Syria, in 1500 BC? Oh, sure, we got a guy like that. They love to talk about what they know.
They love to talk about themselves and their own work. Yeah, no
and their
question.
work. And so, a lot of people don't think in terms of go out and speak to people, but then you can get direct to the information you want, and then you can ask the questions you need answered the most. And I know it's a lot of fun to research. I get lost in it, but for me, I have that reporter sense to go direct to the source.
And I mean, you do both. I the thing that I tried to tell young reporters is know something before you're going to call. Don't call up a congressman and say, how long have you been a congressman? Know the background. Know what bills they've filed, so that your conversation is about substance and not just the stuff that they hand out in a press release. And that's a skill that you learn. So.
One setup assistant will help you set up your file.
Phil, did you want to add anything to this discussion at all about research or people?
Again, just as Michael said, as Rachel said, when I ask people for their either opinions or facts or information about their profession, they love it. They love to discuss it. They love to talk about it. They love to point me to other people who can assist me as well, their colleagues. And I enjoy that. I enjoy making those connections. I love that networking opportunity because I know I can maybe go back to them in the future, and they love being credited in the book for a story or something like that. That's also a lot of fun as well. So I enjoy it immensely. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you find the people who were just remarkably good at what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't ever talk to them long enough, so
yeah, you can't. It's I have a lot of respect for anybody who's good at what they do. And I get caught up in it. I go out to do a story, I should be there 15 minutes, I'm there 2 hours.
Yeah.
Because it's so fascinating. People that really know what they're talking about is a huge shortcut to get to the nitty-gritty of what you want to learn.
Yeah, and you ask them an open-ended question, and then it just starts flowing, and and you have to be smart enough not to interrupt it. So I just let them. I used to write a column for the Daily Record, and the concept that we talked to one person about whatever they were doing, and there were no prejudging about who they were or what they were going to do. We avoided corporate CEOs and politicians, but we talked to people who were involved in grassroots political operations and things like that. And the whole point of it was to simply get them talk about their life. And if you just threw out some questions, I had to, because I was writing these ahead. I taped all of these things. I'd end up with 3.5, 4 hours worth of tape to wade through to create the story, because you tap into the thing that they want, who they were, and they were willing to tell you who they were. So
Yeah, I'll just sort of toss this out there. It seems that if you're cultivating that relationship, that it's also, Phil, you talked about going back to them. It's probably also someone you could go back to and say,
yeah.
Can you read this passage? Make sure I got it right. And they'll be happy to do that for you too.
Yeah.
Super important. That's really important, because when you do get it wrong, your readers will call you out. So you want to get, fiction must ring true. And by knowing these people and learning from these people, that also flavors your work. You get to know kind of what the personality of somebody in that position is like,
Yeah.
so that it helps you create better fiction. You know, not only you learn the facts, you learn the social structure around what these people are doing, which is just as important.
Yeah.
You know,
The column writing was interesting because the trick was not to insert my editorial voice into the column, to make the column about them telling their story, and that in is really good practice for writing fiction, in a lot of ways, and they worked. I got a call one time. I interviewed a woman who was flaming liberal, and I knew she was, and that was why I wanted to talk to her. I got a call from a former Army general who said, you know, you didn't edit that at all. She was really a flamer. And I said, well, that was the point of the column, is to just to let her tell her story. And he said, oh, okay, well, I guess it worked. I said, well,
yeah,
let me talk to you next week, and you can do the same thing. He said, no, I don't want to do that. You know, but it just showed that the column worked, and the technique of letting them tell their story and me in the background as the writer became a very interesting challenge. And when it worked really well, but in that case, it was really rewarding. So,
good stuff.
Keep the writer out of the writing.
Yeah.
exactly.
That's the non-lonely part of being a writer. Writing is lonely. There's a lot of hours by yourself, but then you get to talk to people, which is
Yeah.
awesome, you know.
Yeah, so it sounds like this goes across all genres, so that's great. Let me turn to Phil to ask, do you have a favorite author or authors or book or books from, say, speculative fiction or paranormal, whichever one you want to offer?
I was influenced by Edgar Allan Poe, Arthur Conan Doyle, more contemporary people like Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, Ted Sturgeon, Heinlein, the whole cadre of writers from that time frame. What I like to call sort of a golden age of speculative fiction. They wrote across many genres, and that inspired me to do the same, and to explore and to experiment with every single story. And if I get it wrong, I just keep trying until I get it right. Yeah, all those writers. I have bookshelves filled with Vonnegut, to Rachel's point. Philip Jose Farmer and Jack Vance and Ursula K. Le Guin and so many who have inspired me over the years. Absolutely, and even some of the writers that I attend conventions with, Peter David, Michael Jan Friedman, Howard Weinstein, some of whom have become mentors to me over the years at various times. I might run stories past them, as Rachel said, you would, or as Dianna said, you would go back to them with your story and have them read it. And it's been fun just cultivating those kind of relationships with more contemporary writers who are still with us, who were my heroes that I could see twice a year when I go to the conventions and hang out with them and chat about the business with them. Is a lot of fun, and it keeps me inspired to go back home and keep writing and keep writing. If you are in fact writing off by yourself and you never talk to anyone, eventually your energy drains. to keep that energy high and keep yourself motivated, to be around writers constantly and chatting about it, and keeping yourselves inspired is very important for the morale as well as for inspiration.
Absolutely.
And Rachel, you said Vonnegut, you've already credited him, and Tolkien. What other authors do you look to? Or books?
Just as Phil mentioned, that whole list plus more. But Tolkien was a huge influence on me. But I have to say my favorite book, which I don't even remember reading, was called Lassie Come Home. And the reason it was my favorite book is because it was the first novel I ever read by myself. And I was 7 years old. I was an early reader. So it was a huge accomplishment. Lassie Come Home. That was the first novel I ever read. So I guess that's my favorite because that sent me on a trajectory where I've been eating books ever since. So yeah, I'm a voracious reader and I love all of those authors. In fact, I've never really read Sir Arthur Dolan, Sherlock Holmes. I'm about to launch into that.
Okay.
I read them all. I haven't read them. I just a few of his short stories, but I haven't read those books, and I'm about to start.
Nice.
Cool.
So,
How about you, Michael? What authors or books?
Probably of this group, I am probably the least well read of any of you. And a lot of that has to do with as a kid. I read a lot of sports books. I mean, I read Ted Williams' Science of Hitting, and I can tell you how to take an inside pitch and put it in right field by pulling your hands in and shifting your hips. So I don't know that I particularly focused on anything. I listen to a lot of music. We have a very musical family. I grew up listening to show tunes and Broadway musicals and opera and John Philip Sousa, and then rock and roll. I was in a rock band in high school. My sister sings opera and Broadway stuff. My others, brother and sister, play Appalachian folk music, and music was an influence. And as you become a writer out of the music, you hear how the language sounds, which for me is really important. In high school, I started reading Eugene O'Neill. At 15, I didn't understand Eugene O'Neill, but again, I liked the structure of the play. I liked the language that he used. And when I got in college, I read what were popular at the time, the three Johns: John Updike, John Cheever, and John Gardner. And each of those presented, because of their vast storytelling skill and the way they work the characters and the language, that was the influence for me. And then when I started to write, I unconsciously was trying to copy their musical ability as a writer. And then from there, you just develop ideas. So, yeah.
Interesting. So let's see. I'll start with Rachel. Have you been influenced by any of your followers or fans? Like, have they suggested things that you followed up on?
Not truthfully, not so much. I don't hear much from fans. I do, the reviews on my books. I go and read them once in a while, but I do welcome criticism, and that's why I continue to involve myself in critique groups, both with the Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group and here in Florida where I live. I'm a member of several, and the reason I do that is to keep my mind sharp and to get feedback on my stuff. I want to continuously make my stuff better. So even though I don't hear much from fans, mostly because I don't do social media, I get enough feedback that it keeps me growing and it keeps me pointed in a good direction where I feel like I'm continually improving what I'm doing. So.
Okay. Phil, how about you? Do you hear from
not a
fans,
deluge, certainly, but I've had fans ask me to write more of the paranormal mystery novels. I have a psychic medium, single mom character named Miranda Lorenzen.
That's right. Yeah.
And my last adventure with her was 4 years ago, so I'm quite overdue for a new novel, which is in progress right now. And as I sit here, and if you've noticed during this call, I've been looking over my shoulder every so often.
Yeah.
Let me explain that. I'm actually in the middle of the Allegheny Mountains right now, in a dining hall attached to a lodge. I am the only one in the building. The windows out, everything outside is pitch black. And there is some kind of strange scraping, scratching noises behind me. I'm not making this up. This is not an Edgar Allan Poe story. And I'm looking over my shoulder wondering what this is, because outside the windows I can see nothing, and there are animals everywhere around here. So, and the reason why I'm here is because our own Glivwig member, Larry Shard, is a co-organizer of the Mindful Writers Retreat, which happens twice a year or 3 times a year, up here in the Ligonier Camp and Conference Center in Ligonier, PA. So that's what I'm here participating in this week. As I speak about paranormal and ghost stories and these odd things are happening behind me, I am looking over my shoulder wondering what I'm going to see any minute now. But so pardon me if that happens once in a while. I could be writing another short story just sitting here at this point.
All right.
You know what's funny, Phil, is where I live is exactly like that, because I live in the middle of a national forest.
Oh,
You know,
wonderful.
in an RV park. Actually, we have cougars and bears, owls, you name it. I see them all the time. They're around all the time. So when I hear scratching in the night, I just roll over and go back to sleep.
That's
Oh.
true. Yeah.
Michael, how about you? Do you have?
I occasionally, one of the way that I hear from fans in this series, I hear from people who like it or constantly asking me when the next one's going to be out. So there's this enormous pressure to get one out every other week. But a lot of what, and Rachel made this point too, the comments and suggestions that you hear in writers groups, Rachel, you'd be very surprised how many of the comments from Glidwig end up in the Nagler books, because you guys are really sharp, and you're pointed and saying this works, this doesn't work, why did you do that? Great questions, and you go back and you look at it. In terms of and when I occasionally look at the reviews, and what I want to see from them, somebody who writes 2 paragraphs in a review, was to see if they got it. I mean, there was a point, there was a reason I did this, and you want to see if they got it. And if they didn't, then you go back and rethink about how you present it. Two direct things from certain people that I've been told. There's a character named Sister Catherine in 3 of the books. She cannot come to harm in any way, shape, or form. And the other one is Leonard, who is one of the oldest characters in the series. He's a blind man who runs a bookstore. Nothing more bad can happen to Leonard. So I have these directives that I have to live with.
So these characters have endeared themselves to your readers, and that is enormous, Michael. That's an enormous accomplishment. So absolutely fantastic. And I didn't touch on critiques, and and Rachel and Mike are absolutely correct. Both in and out of Glivwig, my critique partners have been fantastic, and they've really helped me along the way in my journey. So I'm deeply grateful to them.
Yeah, you can't find that, and you sit there and you think that, and especially because I mean, a lot of the folks who read every week have spent a couple of days polishing stuff, and because of the way I do some freelancing and I've been running all over the place, I'll start writing something at 2:00 in the afternoon, have it done by 4, and read it that night, and it's remarkably rough. But everyone is very kind and goes, "Yeah, this is good. This is good. I don't understand this," and and you go back and then you play with it. So, yeah, greatly appreciated.
Well, the nice thing about critique groups, I always try to participate in cross-genre critique groups, because I'm of the opinion that no matter what you write or what your angle is, we can all contribute to each other, because good writing is good writing, and it really doesn't matter where it comes from. And I've written lots and lots of nonfiction for magazines, newspapers, and stuff. So I can look at a nonfiction book and make a few suggestions, or I can look at other kinds of fiction that I don't usually write, and I can bring forward what I do know about writing that may apply. I can't tell you how to write the style of romance, but I can tell you I don't understand this sentence because it's not clear. What are you trying to say here? That helps the writer. And
It
it
also,
doesn't
yeah, it
matter.
also helps that you hear your stuff, you hear
Mhm.
Mike's stuff, you hear Ginny's story about the wolves, and your imagination just opens up because of the way they're created, the world creation, and the way their use of language, and you take that away afterwards, and it's like, okay, here's something to learn about. And it works really well, you know. And you hear it from all those different genres, different stories, and you want to incorporate what you're learning there because it's all a learning exercise, you know.
I have to say that this Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group, through that interaction, looking at other people's work, I've come up with like 5 new short stories
Okay.
through discussions because of the group, because of ideas that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it inspired me to write a story, including a romance. I wrote a romance, a short story, but I wrote a romance.
And you
Uh-oh.
didn't burst into flames?
I
Oh my
didn't burst
goodness.
into flame. Why? Because somebody inspired it from another author inspired it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
just
that, I
the
tried.
tales are remarkably deep and inspiring. We have some folks who are really digging into their lives to write these things, um, and you just have to appreciate and take a moment and be in awe of their approach. You know, because that's the hardest thing, to have the courage to dig. So, yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
yeah, it's a scary place sometimes.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll start to wrap up. But I'll start with Phil. So we've talked just now about the Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group as a great source of inspiration and support. But within, let's come back to the genre topic. So Phil, within, say, spec fiction or science fiction, are there national groups or national or regional conference that you would advise or could recommend to the audience who might be interested in that area of writing that would be good for them to join or attend?
Absolutely. Conventions like PhilCon, the Philadelphia Science Fiction Convention, which will be coming up in November. Balticon, which is, as the name implies, Baltimore's science fiction convention, which is Memorial Day weekend. These 2 cons alone that will offer you an opportunity to meet writers at all levels, award winners down to beginners, through discussion panels, through sharing a table during an hour-long autograph session where you can network with that particular writer or writers. Also, even multimedia conventions that bring both actors and writers, such as Shore Leave or Farpoint, because those conventions, for example, happen in Hunt Valley, Maryland. I attend them every year, and they bring a large contingent of writers from science fiction, fantasy, paranormal, as well as actors from perhaps your favorite TV shows and movies. But if you're focusing on writers, you have a lot to choose from. They bring about 20 to 30, and again, at all levels. So those are some conventions you can certainly look uh, for
Mhm.
genre writers. Sure.
Great. Michael, how about you? Do you have any to recommend?
I haven't attended many conventions, but I've been in. The thing that I find very useful is when you're in a library group, talking about with a variety of writers. Spend some time talking to everybody as we're doing now. How did you get the ideas? Where does these, learn from the people that you're presenting with? And I've been at numerous library events with 4 or 5 writers, all from different genres, and you do your presentation, but afterwards you ask deeper questions. The kinds of things that we're asking now. Why did you start that particular book, and where the ideas come from? How did you develop it? And all those same topics that we're hearing here, whether they're conventions or not, every one of those interactions has value, and you have to come away. Even if they're at, like, Sunday, I was at a town fair, and there were 3 of us, and during the lulls, all we did was talk about craft. So, yeah.
Okay, great. And Rachel?
Actually, because of COVID, I haven't been out and about much. I will be at the Sunshine State Book Festival in Florida on the 28th, I believe, of January in Gainesville, Florida. I'll be setting up shop there, hawking my books, and I will also be on a panel of science fiction writers talking on the topic of other worlds. Now that COVID is kind of broke, I'm a kind of person that likes to do public speaking. And once I get out of my writer's cave that I'm currently in, I will start booking library talks, and I'll start booking free talks at bookstores and stuff locally where I am.
Mhm.
And I also plan on doing a book tour with my little RV traveling around the country. But I'm a ways away before that's going to happen. I want to get the next couple of books out first. And then I'm going to hit the road in my RV and go everywhere and talk. That's my
Any, anything though, even regional or national, for advice for writers, like a convention that you've been to that you would really highly recommend, for example?
Well, the Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group convention here in the Lehigh Valley, which has always been really good. It's inexpensive. It's very focused, and it delivers a lot. And I'm saying that as a longtime member, but I was also a conference chair in 2005. And we always put on a really good show. It's always extremely well attended. And I don't think we've had a bad conference yet in all these years. So I try and get there every year, even though I live in Florida now. But I will be expanding. And some of the ones Phil mentioned, I'm right behind him. So as soon as I can get out of my cave and get the rest of these books out I'm working on, I will be seeing Phil at least a few of these.
Okay.
Looking forward to it. And I do second Rachel's comment about the Right Stuff conference up here in the Lehigh Valley. I was also a chair for the 2015 conference. I enjoyed that experience. I go every year either as a presenter or just an attendee because we're always learning. So I sit in as many courses as I can to learn from my peers and those who we strive to be as writers, always striving to improve ourselves, and I enjoy every minute of it. So, yep.
Thanks. Well, we're almost out of time, so I will ask each panelist to very quickly tell the audience how they can either find your works or follow you, whatever you want to share. Let's start with Phil again, since you were just up.
Oh, yeah, you can just go to philjunta.com. And there's links to free short stories on my website, all of my books that you can go buy. If you scroll down on the homepage, there's links to all of my social media sites as well: Facebook, Twitter, Goodreads, etc. You can just click on any one of those icons and you can find my page, Author Central, on Amazon, etc. So philjunta.com.
Okay, great. And Rachel, how about you?
My books are sold. They're all ISBNs on them, the e-book and the paper books. And you can go to my website, rctom.com. That's rcthom.com. That's Rachel C. Thompson, my name abbreviated, at .com or .net. That'll tell you about my books, show you their covers, and the ISB numbers are there. So if you use those numbers, you can buy my books anywhere books are sold internationally.
Great. And you, Michael, where can people?
Yeah, you can find information about my books and samples and stuff at michaelstevendaigle.com. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and all of that, and the links are there. The books are available through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and even Walmart.com. For the life of me, I'm not sure we've ever sold anything on Walmart.com, but it's interesting.
Yes, I've noticed that with my books as well. I don't think I've sold anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this series is actually a quote Walmart kind of book, but what the heck,
Sure.
You never know. So yeah, I mean, you do the whole social media thing, and it's available. So
Okay.
good.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for a great discussion, and I'd like to thank you, our audience, for attending. Enjoy the rest of the Easton Book Festival, and we also invite you to join the Greater Lehigh Valley Writers Group.